welcome everybody to our very first alumni guest lecture series. And I'm going to let him introduce himself and take over the presentation from this point on. So welcome.
I'm Qail. I graduated in 2014. I was in Mr. Walks's class like 6, 7, and 8 years ago. And right now, I also graduated from university, so I'm a developer right now at Amazon. This is my week off, so I thought what better fun than to, chat. But yeah, so that's pretty much it about me. There's nothing really interesting going on. But I did set up a little lecture on design patterns or principles, as they're called. Is it backwards for you guys?
No, it looks good.
Okay. So yeah, so I have a little bit of slideshows, and we're going to look at two design patterns mostly, MVVM and MVC. We'll get into a little bit of what they are and what the letters stand for. But first, let's go over the order of events that I lined up. I just thought we'll look at like a basic front end application flow. Then we'll see what a problem is and what are design patterns and how do they fit in, kind of thing. And both these design patterns are mainly meant for front end applications, not really meant for back end stuff, because they are structured on views. So the basic flow of a front end application is, you have data, you want to do stuff with the data, and you want to show it to the user somehow. So the big problems are, how do we get the data and display it efficiently to the user? It's a simple question, but it's hard to answer, and people still are trying to find better answers today. So what is the design pattern? Well, essentially they architect how we retrieve data, and they do some minor processing and then display the data to the user in a manner that makes sense. So it gives the user the information they want. Some frameworks have really good helpers because they structure the framework around these design patterns, and they simplify a lot of the tedious and repetitive stuff. And a good example of an MVC framework is Laravel. It's for PHP, and it has very good tooling and built-in command line tools that make generating all this stuff very easy. And it also does some of the tedious code behind stuff that we don't want to do. These guys know what code behind is?
It's hard to say, Kyle. I mean, sometimes I mention these things in class. I just wanted to jump in real quick as well and say to all the students online right now, I'm sure Kyle would be okay if you could jump in with questions at any point. So one of the students actually requested this topic, and although this is taught at the post-secondary level, I would imagine, Kyle, and feel free to back me up on this or reject my point, that a lot of this mostly comes when you get into industry. When you actually start working in the industry, this isn't really an academic topic so much as a software development as a job topic. So if you could speak to that.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so actually I'll go into that right now. So you don't learn a lot about design patterns like this in university. You learn a little bit about it in college, which is kind of funny. But you will learn a lot about this through like guest lectures or like video conferences, because this is very specific to the type of company you are, to the type of language you want to use, to the type of thing you want to build, right? So for example, Laravel and PHP, I didn't even know Laravel existed until my first internship. MVVM, on the other hand, which a lot of Microsoft apps use, I learned that in high school when we went to that what was that talk that we went to, the web dev or whatever, WebCon or whatever.
You mean the Prairie Dev Con?
Yeah, so Prairie Dev Con, when I learned about MVVM the first time.
Yeah, sad note there. I was going to bring the kids this year, and unfortunately, our COVID-19 happened and we got canceled. But it's going to be on in the fall, and I'm going to actually try to make a special request to the organizer of that. I don't know if you remember, Kyle, after you graduated, I was able to get you to come back as a student. So I think he'd be probably open to me inviting even the kids who graduated. I know a couple of you are on the line right now, to come back in the fall and get into that event, because it's a couple $100 to attend that event otherwise. So I think he'll be open to that, and I think that would be a neat opportunity once we get things back to a new normal. Also, real quick, one of our school administrators was watching this Teams meeting, and he sent me a message. He just said, "Who is this student again?" So, Kyle, could you just once again just sort of go over your Sturgeon Heights experience?
Yeah. So I was in Sturgeon Heights from 2010 to 2014. I did IB, I guess. I don't know. I tried to play sports, but didn't make the teams. But Yeah, so that's pretty much it about me, I guess. I don't know. Pretty average student, maybe below average a little bit. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. By the way, sign me up for that Prairie DevCon. I'm definitely down for that, just as a side note. But yeah, so in regards to design patterns, they're very specific to languages, very specific to apps or games, well, apps mostly, very specific to the tool you use, because a lot of the tooling is built around these frameworks. So for example, Laravel, you can just type in like, Laravel, make me a model, like just 5 words, and it'll do a crazy amount of code that you don't want to write. And code behind is, I know Mr. Walks, when I was there, you taught us how to generate the UI by dragging and dropping, and then all the stuff would be generated for us. That's essentially code behind. It's code behind what you see. All right, so now the 2 things we're going to look at, by the way, my title is cut off, as you guys can see up top, but I don't know why that is, but essentially all this is we have some similar letters between MVVM and MVC. So we're going to explore those letters first because they're very quick, and then we'll explore the differences. So let's start with the M. What does M stand for? It's model, right? And what is a model? So it essentially defines the structure of what we want to use and what we want to store, right? This is how we interact with storage indirectly. So now what is storage? Well, this is anything that our data is sitting in. I'm just using layman terms. You'll get more into these kind of terminologies when you go further into university or do some research. But storage is essentially just where the data sits. This can be a JSON file. This can be a database. This can be an Excel sheet. I know a couple of friends, they worked for the government in like some African countries, and they had their entire database for the country built on Microsoft Excel. Like it was just an Excel sheet that was just huge. And then many frameworks will handle dealing with models and how they're stored, so we don't have to. We just define it, and that's it. So here's an example of how we define a model in C#. This is a more of a generic example. It can be used in Xamarin, which is a cross-platform tool. It can also be used in just Windows apps, that kind of thing. So for example, let's say we're making a stylish teacher app. All right. So in this, so we define a model for the teacher, and the model's going to have, yeah.
Quick note. I did get a message from one of the students in the chat said, is there a way to make your presentation full screen? Can you just check in the meeting options, that little marching ants, the 3 ellipses there, and see if you can sort of share your screen or go full screen in some way that they can see it better?
It just says show device settings. It doesn't show me full screen, so I don't know how to do that.
Does it have a one beside that, the little button that says share?
Yeah. Oh, okay. You want me, yeah, I can try sharing the screen if that's better.
Yeah, that might be better.
Yeah, okay. So then here is that, no, that's not it. Is that better? Am I on the wrong screen?
I think I think that worked.
That worked?
I think so.
Let's see. Okay, yeah, I'll try it. I'll try it for now. If anyone sees any issues with that, just let me know. Yeah, so let's go back. Okay, so here's a model example.
I got a message that's perfect.
Okay, sweet. So this is just an example of a model in C# that we can use to define how we store data. So for example, let's say we're making a stylish teacher app, right? So we want the teacher's first name, the last name, an ID, and a best feature, right? And what we do is we'll just define these things just as simple, variables in a class, and then that'll just represent how we want to store data. And that's all handled behind the scenes, so we don't have to touch any of that code. But essentially, here's an Excel sheet just to represent the data in a database as an example, and what we have to type in our editor. And then, so this removes the guesswork, because when we have a model, we can actually change the values and we know exactly what the fields are. So we know there's a first name, we know there's a last name, and we don't have to go see the schema or the way the database is written to know what we have and what we don't have. And then this makes it easier for our views to interact with this data because we know that we have this data. So that's pretty much the simple thing. Okay, now let's see, what does the V stand for? And V stands for view. So it's just a GUI, it's just what we see. So here's an example of an Android app. I know it's overlapping the text. I don't know why that is. I think it just got formatted badly when I put it on full screen. But essentially, this is a view. It just shows you our data. It summarizes their data. It gives the user what they want, and that's pretty much it. So now the question comes, how do we display stuff on the view from the model, right? How do we organize it? How do we format it? How do we, get the data we want? How do we compute all that stuff? Well, that's where the VM and the C come into play, right? So, well, why do we need something else? The question is because we have raw data, right? We just have strings, ints, floats. Now we want to make it pretty because no user is going to go and just look at just a text box full of that stuff. So we want to make it stylish. We also want to know, like, for example, in our stylish teacher app, we want to know if the teacher is stylish based on the data that's stored. We're not going to store it if they're stylish or not. We might see their best feature, like a ponytail, and we might say, oh, that's stylish, right? So we need to be able to compute that, and that's why we need something else. So first, let's look at the C in MVC. So MVC stands for Model View Controller. And the controller does just three simple things. It handles the user's requests and get an appropriate response. This comes a little bit more advanced, but that's mostly for like when you have a database that's remote. It'll act as the interface between the view and the model, and it'll manipulate the data using the model to render the final output. So what does that mean? Okay, so let's say we have this data, right? We have one teacher in our stylish teacher database with the ID of 1, first name of Lawrence, last name of Not Walks, and then the best feature is ponytail, right? So we need to find out if Lawrence Not Walks is stylish, and how do we do that? Well, that's what the controller can do for us, right? But now, before we get into the nitty gritty and how that works, let's look at what a VM is in MVVM. It's not a virtual machine. It stands for view model. So it's model, view model. So VM and like a view model and a controller do very similar things, just in different ways. But a VM is very, very useful when it comes to data binding. Now, you might be wondering, what's data binding? And here's a very simple example. So this is supposed to be a GIF, which is not playing for some reason. But essentially, there's a text box up top. There's a text box up top, and there is just text at the bottom. So you see where it says demo at the end of the line? That will change when the text box changes in real time. So that's what data binding is. It's essentially when data is changed in one place, it'll change everywhere else pretty quickly. I think that's all I had for the slides, and I had a demo that I wanted to go over if people want to learn how to implement this. But if we have questions, I can answer them right now.
That was awesome, Qail. Sorry for the tech stuff. Microsoft Teams tends to sometimes cause those little issues, but that's awesome. I just want to say there are other design paradigms beyond even MVC and MVVM. How did you get introduced to those two models?
So MVVM is what I learned first. Remember, we went to Prairie DevCon years ago, and I won that free phone. So just a short story, okay? So Walks, the first year Walks took me to Prairie DevCon, which is I think grade 9 or grade 10. I don't remember. 2011, I think. Right? There was a guy named Atlee Hunter there, and he had he was working with like an organization under Microsoft. Is what's called Developer Movement, and Microsoft had a phone platform, and this is right before Windows 10, I believe. And they wanted people to make apps for their phones because their store was actually very, very small. So they were doing all these programs and incentives, kind of like what Huawei is doing right now, to try and get their store bigger. So one of the incentives was called Developer Movement. And what they were doing is they were giving prizes and free stuff and all that and things like that to people. So for Developer Movement, one of the competitions that this guy Atlee Hunter was running was if you make an app and it meets a certain criteria, you get a free phone, and there were 200 phones. So right after his talk at Prairie DevCon, I asked him, how do I do it? And he gave me some helpful links on how to get started on making Windows Store apps. At that time, Windows Phone and Windows Store were two different things. So I started making Windows Phone apps, and I did get that phone, and then I made some more. But then right after I made that phone, I found out about another competition called Developer Movement, like I mentioned earlier, where they were giving laptops, Xboxes, controllers, all that good stuff. So then I started going after that. And in doing so, I know it's a little bit long story. In doing so, I was learning about MVVM because that's what Microsoft does a lot. So a lot of C# frameworks have data binding built in, and they have all this other stuff to make it very easy to use MVVM.
Cool. Hey, can you stop sharing your screen so we can see you when we ask the questions?
Oh, yeah. Is that better?
I see nothing yet. Oh, there we go.
Oh, okay. I think what happened was when I shared my screen, it turned off my software, so I just had to reset the camera.
Yeah, that's happened to me as well. Yeah.
But
awesome.
Yes, that's how I got into MVVM, and then MVC just my first work term. That's pretty much it.
Do any of you students have any questions for Qail? It could be about this, or it could be, I know in the survey I gave you kids, a lot of you asked on sort of tips beyond high school to get into industry, tips about interviews and stuff like that. So do any of you have any of those specific questions? Maybe I'll ask for them, Kyle. What tips would you give if you had to go back and give yourself these tips when you were in grade 12? What tips would you give now?
Okay. One thing I will say is focus more on side projects. Everyone stresses out, get an A+, you'll get a good job, get an A+, get a good job. That's great. But when you get in, like, I'm not saying don't get an A+, get an A+. But what I'm saying is don't make that your life. Don't like live, breathe, and eat school, because a lot of things you won't learn in class, like these design patterns. And a lot of companies are looking for people with experience in like stuff like this, like design patterns, language specific experience. Like for example, video games, you most likely will never learn that in school, especially if you go to U of M, right? But a lot of companies want video game experience. So what I would say is, yes, great, get your grades, do your best in school and stuff, but in your spare time, try to make apps, try to make games, because that'll actually set you apart. And then another thing is just to get in through the front door. There are a lot of companies use this one tool to rank candidates when resumes are submitted, and you can I don't remember the name of this tool, but you can Google it, and there are a lot of websites, like resume making websites, that give you a free trial on this tool. So once you have a resume, just submit it to this tool and see how you rank. And then that way it'll show you roughly, like, if you like, and then it'll show you what the recruiter will see, or the HR person, or whoever's doing your case. It'll show you what they see, and then it'll show you how good your resume does.
Awesome.
I also had a demo if anyone's interested.
Well, I know I am. Okay,
this is a Xamarin demo, but it literally applies to any Windows app. So you can make UWP apps, like Universal Windows apps. And if you guys want to follow along, you guys can do this in Visual Studios right now if you guys want. But it's very simple.
And if you could just tell us what, let everyone know what Xamarin is.
Oh yeah. Okay, so there's this universal. Okay, so one of the biggest downsides of making apps is you need to make it for Android, iOS, and Windows. Well, not Windows, no one cares about that, but Androids and iOS for sure. And you can do it natively for both platforms, but it takes a long time to do that. So there are things like React Native, Xamarin, and then other frameworks to build universal apps with one code base. So here, I'll share my screen again, and I'll give you a better look. So this is a very, very simple Xamarin project. The only thing I added were these 3 folders for model, view, view model. But essentially, this is the way it's structured. Is you have stuff for iOS specific things, stuff for Android specific things, and then stuff for just general. So Android and iOS will use the general stuff. That's pretty much how it is. Yeah. So that's the Xamarin project. It'll have one code base, and then you'll have 2 separate UIs for platform specific stuff, but you can just use one code base for all of it. And then there's also React Native, which is made by Facebook. And then there's one by Google, which is like Flutter, I think, or something like that. I don't remember, but there's one by Google that's fairly new, and that's apparently really good as well. I chose Xamarin because it's C#. It's pretty, and it was actually one of the first ones I was exposed to, again, in high school. It was, I think, a different talk at Prairie DevCon, where they were doing a promotion where if you compiled a Xamarin app, you can get a free Xamarin shirt. And obviously, I got the free Xamarin shirt. But yeah, that's why I got into Xamarin, is because it was just introduced to me first. But yeah,
and it's free too, right, Kyle?
Yeah, it's free. And this is Visual Studio. This is free as well. All you got to do to get Xamarin, actually, you don't even need to do anything to get Xamarin. Here, I'll show you guys. All you go is just go new project, and then you can just search up mobile, and it's right there. Once it loads, reload. Yeah, it's right there. It's the first one, and then you just click enter. But yeah, my demo is very simple. I just created these 3 folders, and we're just going to create just a new item. Content page, because I'm most familiar with those, and we're just going to call it, we'll just call it main page or let's call it the stylish teacher page for now. I probably spelled stylish wrong, but whatever. So that's the stylish teacher page, and we can do a quick example of how everything works together. How the model, the view model, and the view works together. So very simply, we just have We're just gonna make 3 labels, and that's it. So so what I was thinking was, let's start off. Okay, let me give you my thoughts. So we're gonna start off with the model because that's the easiest way to work from, because we are defining how our data is structured, and we're just gonna call it the stylish teacher. And if you guys saw the slides, you guys can copy the code exactly word for word from there. Okay. Oh, okay. So so actually I have to restart my project because I accidentally put a space in the name of the project because I called it MVVM tutorial, and that's going to result in a lot of bugs. So I'm just going to create a new project quickly. Then we're going to go mobile.
If you get the chance, Kyle, could you also zoom in on the code a little bit? It's pretty small in the video.
Let me just, I'm just creating a new project because, like I said, there was a space in the old one, so it's going to lead to a lot of problems. And I'm just going to create a blank app. And then once it gets past the screen, I'll zoom in. Is it a simple Control plus to zoom in, or do I have to go through settings? Okay. So either way, we'll just create a folder for model. And then,
I think if you just hold Control and roll your mouse, it should work. Okay. Once you're in code view.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll just create a stylish teacher model. Okay, there we go. So this is just a simple stylish teacher model, and all we're gonna do is we're just gonna define public string for first name. And we're not going to make it work with a database, so we don't need to worry about all that for now. But we're just going to deal with just a simple case where we mock the data all in real time. And we're just going to call we can just add an int for ID just to be more realistic. Okay, so this is a basic model that we have. It's just called a stylish teacher. By the way, we should always make this public because you'll run into issues later on if you don't. So this is just a public teacher, a stylish teacher, and all it has is ID, first name, last name, and best feature. Very simple. And that'll translate into, and this is essentially how our database is going to be structured, or a JSON file, or whatever we want to store it in. So all we have to do is this from our side. Then what we need to create is a view model. So we're going to create a folder for view models. And we're just going to call it the stylish teacher view model. And then we're just going to create a view as well. And we'll just call it the stylish teacher page. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So that's all we need is we have a view model, a view, and a model. So that's pretty much it. So then for the view model, this is where all the fun stuff happens. So remember I mentioned data binding. So in data binding, we need to add something to notify when property changes, because we need to make everything one for one, right? So if you change text in a text box, you need to make sure that text changes in a label, stuff like that. So we need to have a property changed method for that. And then, sorry, I accidentally opened Visual Studio again. Right, so that's pretty much it. And then in the view model, we can have, so we need to have private, and then we're going to call this the stylish teacher as a model. So we need to have a teacher that we're going to display to the user, and we're going to show if that teacher is stylish or not. So we're just going to take, this is our model. Oh, that's not it. Oh, I spelled it's stylist teacher. Actually, I spelled it stylist teacher, but essentially we have our model here. This is our view model, and now we need to display that data, and that's the only thing that's left. So in order to do that, we're going to have.
It seems like a Freudian slip. Instead of trying to make fun of me, you realize that I was your stylist. That I set your style, Kyle. That wasn't an accident there.
That's why I'm messing up so much, right, Wax? But yeah, sorry, what I was gonna say is right. So you guys see over here it says inconsistent. So the reason I was saying to make things public is because it shows us here when things are not public, we don't have access to it. So if I go back to the stylus teacher, which is not supposed to be here. Okay, we can ignore that. Okay, there's just a, I messed up somewhere. Oh, whatever, that's fine. So now this is like the only, so I know it's taking a little bit of time for me to type all this, but this is the main setup we need for everything to work well, is just, we also need, so once we have this, we need to have a function to actually do the update, and that's this function right here. And all it's going to do is it's going to take the name of whatever we change. So let's say teacher, for example, and it's going to update everything that way. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. And then so once we have this function to update, we need to just call it, and then we just need to pass it the name of the teacher. So I'm just going to take a step back and explain to you what I did. So in a view model, because everything is data bound, right? We need to actually make it accessible to the view. So, but we also need to notify the view when things are changed. So these two functions over here, as well as this interface, will notify the view that things are changed. And then and so we call it here every time we update the data. Now in C#, we use these things. I can't remember what they're called, but essentially these are getters and setters, like we would in Java. But we can do functions like this where we can update and notify when properties are changed. And the MVVM framework uses these things heavily because it's a C# specific code style. And okay, this here does not need to be here. Okay, so now that will. Okay, so now that's all we need for our view model essentially, is that is just this stuff right here. So now once we have this for our view model, in our view we can call the view model and use it. So actually, sorry, there's one more thing we need. We need to have a constructor, because we need to actually, because we don't have any data, we're going to mock the data. So we're essentially in the constructor, all we're going to call is we're just going to mock the data just manually, and we're just going to say teacher equals new stylus teacher. And then in C#, you guys can use these curly braces to specify properties. So we can go with ID equals 1, first name equals, let's just say, I probably spelled Lawrence wrong. And then last name equals not blocks, and then best feature equals ponytail. So that's pretty much, so that's all we need to do in the view model. We instantiate our model, and then we also have you know, the best, and we're just going to mock the data, and then we're just going to notify when properties are changed. So I know I messed up a lot, but this is just simple 39 lines of code. And then in our view, we can just go in our view, and then we can just specify that we want that view model. So we're going to go in the code behind. So this is essentially the view, and this is what's called the code behind, because this is the actual stuff that happens behind the view. And in here, we're just going to set the binding context, which is where we data bind, to equal, and we're just going to call it a new stylish teacher view model. And then by doing that, we have our mock data and everything good to go. So now in our view, all we can do is just simply call data bind. Like we can just data bind by call binding, and then we can go to teacher, and we can go dot first name. Very simple. And then that's pretty much it for basics for the basic structure of an app. So when I load it up on this Android phone, you guys should be able to see Lawrence, unless I messed something up. Can you see the phone?
I can see the phone, but I don't see the data.
Yeah, it's just because it's compiling right now. So at the bottom here, it shows you the compiling. Now it's deploying to the actual phone. And yeah, The worst part is it takes a little while to compile.
I just want to add a side note, especially for the grade 12s who are watching right now. You'll notice up in the corner there in the background that the code that he's using there is XML code. We talked about that in that little introduction to those of you going to Red River next year, that some of that XML code, what that means. XML is a very extendable. It essentially just is a very useful mock-up language for lots of things, including designing stuff on phones.
Yeah, so actually I did realize I messed up somewhere, by the way. So what I messed up was right here. So since we have a main page that comes by default and we made a new page called the teacher stylish page, we actually need to update this to the stylish teacher page. And the way we do this is we can just remove this line and we need to create what's called a navigation page. And this stuff you kind of just need to know. And in the navigation page, we need to call a stylish teacher page. And if everything goes well, I just need to refresh the app and then it should work. Okay, sorry, I forgot a parentheses. Also, just as a heads up, with going off with the XML you said, this is actually XAML. So it's built on XML, but it has like properties such as data binding built into it. It's even better.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then
I'd like to point out too, for those of you listening, how much of the language that Qail's using from his experience in post-secondary and now in industry, hopefully you're recognizing a lot of that language from our class experience. When he said setters and getters, and maybe you're thinking accessor mutators and constructors, like all the stuff from the grade 12 and the IB level down, all the way even just to grade 10 level content, that language that you've had experience with is part of not only your post-secondary, but also the experience of being a professional.
Okay, it looks like something messed up. I feel like this is a compilation issue because nothing is working. View model binding context is there. Yeah, okay, so I messed something up. Give me 1 second.
As Qail debugs, I'd like to point out that teaching programming is not easy, and it's nice to sometimes get validated with that. Sometimes you get little errors on the fly. It happens. It happened to me a lot, especially when I was first teaching. So a lot of what you guys see now is content that I've kind of perfected. And I'd also like to point out that some of the stuff in the grade 12 computer science course was first tried in Qail's class. That was some of the first classes where I introduced the concept of things like generics and interfaces and things like that. I remember Qail and I specifically sitting down and having a conversation about some of those things and how they could help him moving forward. So I'm constantly trying to do that best I can. I'm a 50-year-old guy. I can only do so much, but I do try to stay with that as much as possible to give you kids the best experience possible. I try anyways.
Okay, I think I figured out the issues because since we changed the main page, it needs to. I need to recompile this. So just give me 1 second here. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because I'm looking at my reference and the code looks pretty much the same. So I really worked something up here.
You are getting a warning message I can see down there, but I don't think that should be the problem.
Oh no, this is just saying that I need a Mac computer to compile an iOS.
Mm.
It's the wonderful thing Apple does, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it should be compiled now. So, but yeah, that was supposed to be a very simple MVVM demo, but I messed it up 3 times. So I'll give you credit, Watch.
You know what? No worries. I appreciate all of that, Qail. just take a quick look at who's still on the line. Can you tell us, as you're sort of debugging there, a little bit about your day-to-day now working for Amazon? Kind of like, what is that experience like compared to when you were a high school programmer versus a post-secondary programmer? What's it like now, just when they're paying you to do this in your job? Like, what's your day-to-day like?
So it's more interesting. It's also like so the like, you know, just like working for anyone, right? In any field, you don't get to do what you want all the time. So some of the times you get to do what you want and you get to do what you like, and that's really fun. But some of the times you don't get to do what you like, and you have to do stuff that's like the nitty gritty, like, you know, stuff that you're not necessarily familiar with, not necessarily enjoy, that kind of thing. So so like right now I'm working on something that I really kind of like, and I'm using a language called Python, which is really easy and really fun to use. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't really have a crazy amount to add to that. But yeah, that's pretty much all I do is like, it's busy, right? Some nights I'll work overtime. Companies generally work differently. Like, for example, at Amazon, you don't get overtime, right? But other companies you do, stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know.
One thing I remember, maybe I'm mistaken, but one thing I remember struggling with you in high school was you didn't want to comment your code.
Yeah.
Is that the same? Or
So actually, I started commenting my code better, like in person, but you'll find a lot of companies don't have very well commented code, and it's very frustrating. So please comment your code. Like, there's one project I took over from a guy who left, and there was no information on it. I spent 3 days figuring out that all I need to do is type in one line, and that makes everything work. So always, always, always comment your code. That's like, that's a very, very good advice, just for anyone, everything, you know, just comment your code. Oh, one thing you guys should always learn is Git. I highly recommend learning Git, because if you don't have comments in your code, at least you have a commit somewhere telling you what you did.
All right, Kyle.
So this demo is not working. I don't know why.
That's okay. Let's just shelve it for now. Can you go back to seeing you?
Oh yeah, sorry, it doesn't work. Okay, yeah, here. Yeah, there we go.
There. So I want to open it up if anyone has any questions. A bunch of us teachers met yesterday and we talked about how in online learning, everyone is much shyer than they are in classroom learning. It's one thing we've learned is, and I get it, it's a weird environment.
No,
No questions.
I know at work it's been a little bit of a getting used to, because, you know, like, everyone had to go. Like, we were abruptly told just randomly, hey, you guys are walking home, or you guys are all working from home starting tomorrow, so take all your stuff and go. And we're like, what? Okay, that's fun. The good thing is a lot of companies have infrastructure to work from home, so people work from home occasionally. So for us, it wasn't that distraughting. I know, like, one of the guys who runs a couple of organizations in the government, they had a very painful time starting to work from home, because they didn't have any infrastructure whatsoever built to work from home. So that was a real pain for them.
Alrighty. Well, listen, Kyle, I'm going to thank you so much for giving your expertise on this matter. And I'm thanking all you students who tuned in today, and my one administrator, although maybe it was his daughter who was actually on the line because she's a computer science student. So thank you so much for teaching us this valuable piece of content. If any of you kids have questions after the fact, feel free to email them to me and I'll forward them on to Kyle if you have any questions specifically. Thank you so much again. I'm going to end the meeting for a lot of you right now. And Kyle, I'm just going to keep you on the line to just chat for a minute afterwards. Sure. And I'll be stopping the recording. And thank you once again, everybody.